Hey, 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 hey. How goes it? No, 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 no. Hey, Moni. How are you, darling? There's what I want. Moni, how much do you want me to read tonight? Or do you want me to read a certain part? I'm going to have to read the rest of this book. I didn't know. Okay. That's perfectly good. I know a lot of times these short stories in these anthologies, I can usually read the whole story, but yours is just way too long. It was longer than I thought it would be. So I won't be able to read the whole thing, but um, I think for this story, I think we need to start at the beginning because it makes more sense. Because otherwise, you're like, who's who, what's what? You know, there's a lot of action packed in that little bitty story. So boom. And yeah, I was looking to see, and I was like, not gonna be able to read all of it. Oh, by the way, I'm eating M&Ms, finishing up the thing. Well, Mike's got a new thing of this sitting on his desk, so I can finish this one up now. Nina, Vinci, check your emails. You might find you a surprise in there tonight. Is she going to be on here as Ori or Nina? Or is Princess got her? All righty, let's go ahead and get started so we can get to the good stuff. You're going to be excited. There's your cover. Who's ready to do some laundry? I might be able to take some laundry off and dirty some up, but you guys can do the washing on them abs. Okay, Big City Heat, a high-rise romance. Anthology. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 authors are in this book, including the one tonight, Miss Moni Boyce. Okay, now then. Make me beg. What? I hit the wrong button, y'all. Sorry. Make me beg. Moni Boyce. In her fight for survival, will she put her heart and her life in his hands? That's all I'm telling you about that. Okay. Tegan. Quit moving. Tegan's stern demand made the patient go still. Gently, she maneuvered the forceps to where the x-ray had revealed the placement of the bullet, in the lower left side of his abdomen. The instrument swiped along muscle and sinewy flesh on its journey. Beneath her hand, she could feel the restless tremor that roamed his body. Any second now, and he would be squirming again. She paused and leveled her gaze at the pale, sweaty goon that was bleeding. If you don't stay still, I can't remove the bullet. She paused for dramatic effect. And you'll die. The protest or expletive that was poised to fall from his lips never came. Instead, he clamped his mouth shut. The last part of her statement was a bit of a stretch. With this kind of wound, it would likely take hours for him to die if unattended. He didn't know that, and if it got him to shut up and hold still, then she was fine with telling the small lie. Neither of them wanted to be here, but it was what it was. Where the hell was the surgeon and the anesthesiologist? Again, she glanced at the clock. 20 minutes ago, Bernard told her they were close. She knew it was rush hour traffic, but they needed to hurry up and get here. Trying to do this with the man conscious was proving to be impossible. Unfortunately, the nurse had stepped away to get the other items necessary for the surgery, or she would have asked her to help restrain him. There was no way of knowing how high up in the hierarchy of the Moran crime family this guy went. Tegan just knew she didn't want to be the one responsible for killing him. The man had been shot doing who knows what kind of crime for the Irish mob, but they wouldn't see it that way. He'd come in here alive. He'd better stay alive. The metallic odor of blood hung in the air, filling her nostrils. Slowly, she rotated the forceps and pushed further inward. It finally hit the tiny object, and she let out the breath she had been holding. With a steady hand, she slowly pulled it free. Just as the bullet plopped into the basin, the surgeon and anesthesiologist arrived. They had already gone through the process of disinfecting and applying masks and gloves. We'll take it from here. Judging from the older woman's take-charge attitude, she was clearly the surgeon. Tegan nodded and moved out of their way. When the surgeon saw her work, she looked impressed and glanced in her direction. Good work. Stay and assist. I'll more than likely need an extra pair of hands. A few hours later, the guy was being taken to one of the private bedrooms to recuperate. Once the doctor and surgeon left, she stayed back with the nurse and tidied up the room, knowing a cleaning crew would take care of the cleaning up the blood. She never learned any of the other medical staff's names. There was no point. They were tourists, all just passing through. Unlike them, she was the constant. She didn't blame them. Who'd want to work permanently for the Moran crime family's illegal makeshift hospital? A yawn she tried to stifle broke through while she removed her disposable latex gloves. After she punched in her code, the false wall slid away and exposed the hallway of an upscale apartment. Once she stepped through, the wall slid back into place. Tegan rubbed her cramped neck while quietly walking along the hall until she reached the large, modernly furnished living room. She still wore scrubs, but she would change out of them before she left for the night. Taking a deep breath and then a slow exhale, she leaned against the wall. Right now, she just needed to be away from the smell of suffering and impending death that haunted her daily, greeted her every time she stepped foot in this penthouse. Tegan didn't need to check her cell phone to know it was late. The large living room was shrouded in moonlight and shadows. Normally, at the end of the day, she'd stand at the panel of floor-to-ceiling windows and stare at the view the penthouse afforded. Manhattan looked magical at night from this vantage point. Certainly didn't get views like it in Jamaica, Queens. But tonight, she was too tired. She slid down the wall until her bottom hit the hardwood floor. All of her limbs suddenly felt heavy. Leaning her head back against the wall, she shut her eyes. It wasn't long before she heard Spencer's claws clicking against the floor during his approach. A small smile lifted the corner of her mouth. Tegan cracked open one eye and peered at the enormous Irish wolfhound. His tongue lolled out of his mouth while he stood in front of her, panting. After a few more seconds, he whined and she opened the other eye. "Come here." The words came out in a low, playful snort while she reached her hand out to him. Spencer happily accepted the invitation and laid his gray, shaggy head in her lap. I just thought of something I need. If I don't write it down, I forget. Okay, sorry. Spencer happily accepted the invitation and laid his gray, shaggy head in her lap. She scratched him behind the ears before moving her hand to his exposed belly. If Spencer were here, that meant she had minutes, possibly only seconds, before his master arrived. As if being conjured from the darkest recesses of her mind, she heard his confident footsteps enter the room before she looked up and watched him swagger toward her. Reed Beckett was powerfully built. Despite the hour, he was dressed like he was ready for a night out on the town. Come to think of it, he always looked like he stepped out of the pages of a high-end fashion magazine or straight off the runway of Fashion Week. She believed he dressed that way because he was vain. Most of the other men in the Moran's clan were uber casual, some bordered on slovenly. Compared to Reed, they seemed like trolls. Under the expensive white button-down shirt that was rolled up to the elbows, his biceps bulged. On the exposed part of his left arm, there was an elaborate tattoo sleeve that came to his wrist. A couple of buttons were undone, exposing more tattoos on his left clavicle. The shirt was tucked into a pair of gray dress slacks that hugged him in all the right places. Kind of like gray sweatpants. Maybe, yeah. He stood over 6 feet tall. She had to tip her head back further to look up at him and see his face. His reddish brown hair was perfectly tousled. Okay. Nina and Vincy will know who I'm talking about because, hey, Thomas, because this is one of my favorite models. And, but if you don't know him, look him up and see if he don't. Kalen Hughes. That is my man. And he would be perfect for this part. He even has his own little place in my diary. Or in my diary. There's a good picture. There we go. Mm. That's who I have pictured here. Mm. His reddish brown hair was perfectly tousled, and his beard was neatly trimmed. His chiseled good looks were the perfect mixture of rugged and beautiful. The man was sexy as sin. Too bad she hated him. At least she likes to play with one of us. The deep timbre of his gravelly voice teasing her caused her heart to race. Even though Reed spoke to his dog, his gaze held hers. His mouth always seemed to have a hard, cruel look, even when he smiled. She lingered on his mouth a little too long before her gaze flickered up to meet his. Wicked mischief and lust filled the gray depths of his eyes. Quickly, Tegan looked away, not liking the way her body responded to him. Oh, Nina, Minnie Me wants a nose ring. Just saying. Wicked mischief and lust filled the gray depths of his eyes. Quickly, Tegan looked away, not liking the way her body responded to him. She asked me how old she has to be before she can get one. I said 16 or 18. I said it just varies. I said when you're 18, I said if you're 16 and you need somebody to go sign with you, just ask me. I said, but but if you're 18, I said, just holler at me. I'll go with you and hold your hand. But I did ask her, I said, do you want it here, like mine, or do you want it here? And she said she wanted this one. Hey, Thomas, ask her what. You need to ask Marty what tomorrow is. Or ask Nina to tell you what tomorrow is. Wicked mischief and lust filled the gray depths of his eyes. Quickly, Tegan looked away, not liking the way her body responded to him. Ignoring his comment, she kept rubbing Spencer and cleared her throat. I was just leaving. A small smile tugged at the edge of her mouth while she rubbed Spencer one last time. Tegan lifted the dog's head and placed it gently on the floor. When she rose, she wobbled on her feet. Her vision swam and she was lightheaded. Within a second of her feeling like she was going to fall, Reed's massive hands gripped her waist to steady her. Underneath his touch, her body was on fire. Molten lava ran through her veins. Although the dizzy feeling disappeared and she was sure she was steadier now, Reed's hands were still on her body. He was standing so close, she was staring directly into his chest. This close, she could smell his scent. Fresh laundered clothes mixed with mint, cedar wood, and something masculine that was all him. She fought the urge to inhale. Being in Reed's proximity was dangerous because her mind was playing out filthy fantasies of what he could do to her on the countertop. Are you okay? His voice dragged her thoughts from the gutter. Tegan chided herself for having sexual daydreams about Reed Beckett. When she dared to look up at him, concern clouded his gaze, replacing the lust that had danced in the depths moments ago. I'm fine. I just stood too quickly. The words came out sounding harsher than she intended, but at least her tone reminded her that she was supposed to hate him, not want to rip off her clothes and tell him to fuck her. For long seconds, he held her gaze. Tegan expected her anger to flare up at her back, her lack of gratitude. Oh, wait a minute, let me try that again. Tegan expected his anger to flare up at her lack of gratitude. When his hands gripped her hips a little tighter, she held her breath. The moment he released her, she exhaled. Instantly, she stepped back and turned and headed down the hallway. It's late. I'll take you home. Reed's command made her bristle. Without slowing down, she responded, I can get myself home. She wasn't some damsel in distress. Weapons were strategically placed in compartments on her bag, and she had taken a few self-defense classes. She could keep herself safe. Like I said, I'll take you home. All humor had fled his voice. Tegan's steps halted, and she peered over her shoulder at him. Reed had his hip braced against the countertop. His arms were crossed over his chest, and the expression on his face said, Don't fuck with me. The cutting remark died on her tongue. Now was not the time to poke the bear. Plus, she knew the dizzy spell from standing up had come about from her being exhausted. Any other day or night, she might have chosen to pick a fight, but she just wanted her bed. Her nostrils flared in defiance, and she turned away and strode down the hall, mentally chastising herself for fantasizing about a man like him, a man she hated. Reed Beckett, you bastard, you're going to be the death of me. Mari, I have been a bad influence on Miss Mari, and she enjoys Naked Friday now. Chapter 2, Reed. For the last 6 months, she treated him like something disgusting she found on the bottom of her shoe. Actually, it went beyond that. That's for you, Vincy. Actually, it went beyond that. It's not that Tegan Palmer thought she was better than him. That wasn't the reason she dismissed him at any given opportunity. He knew there was something else behind her dislike. One day, he was going to crack the beautiful black woman open, find all her treasures, and learn every secret. From the moment she showed up on the Moran's doorstep looking for work, he knew this wasn't her first time among criminals and lowlifes. Only desperation could have driven her to seek work from Christy Moran, the head of the Moran crime family. It was clear she was a different breed of woman than what usually came knocking. Most of the women that turned up asking for favors were dressed like cheap hookers, looking like they should be working a street corner, hoping to use their feminine wiles to get what they needed. Tegan showed up in a classy business suit, looking like the CEO of some Fortune 500 company, and negotiated like a pro, impressing the hell out of Christy, which was no small feat. It went beyond her education. She had a grace and poise that made him want to watch her all day long. Of course, that body of hers also had him hooked. Her Coke bottle shape emphasized her boobs. Ooh, I like that Coke bottle shape. The glass Coke bottles. Oh, yeah. Now we're talking. Her Coke bottle shape emphasized her boobs, which he was sure were more than a handful. Plus, her plump, round bottom made his dick ache every time he watched her walk away. Even now, wearing those ugly blue scrubs, he watched her ass sway while she walked down the hall to change her clothes. His dick hardened at the sight. It wasn't often he found himself at the penthouse well after midnight. Bernie usually took care of things after a certain time. But now that he was here, there was no way he would let her take the subway alone all the way to Queens at this hour. He could handle her wrath. It didn't matter how she treated him. He'd been treated worse. Reed always protected what was his. One day, Tegan would be his. She just didn't know it yet. After Tegan disappeared around the corner, Bernie appeared from the shadows. Eddie came through the surgery. He's recovering. The short, balding Brits. Oh, excuse me. Thomas, may I try some British? You need to be reading this part. Audrey came through. Eddie came. Nope. Eddie came through the surgery. Nope. Can't do it. No, sorry, y'all. It's not gonna work. Eddie came through the surgery. He's recovering. The short, balding Brit's Cockney accent delivered the news Reed needed to carry to the boss later. Thanks, Bertie. Everyone else in the family called the man Bernard. Reed was the only one allowed the nickname. As silently as Bernie entered, he left after providing the update. This is not a two-way thing. I don't have it set up that way. I don't have enough people. One, I don't know. Patiently, Reed waited near the door, knowing if he didn't, she'd probably try to slip past him. During the wait, Spencer came over and nudged his leg. Reed scratched behind his ears. You like that, don't you, boy? Spencer's tall wag. You know, I'm tired today. Spencer's tail wagged back and forth in reply. 15 minutes later, Reed knew she was approaching when the dog's ears pricked forward. Tegan scowled at him before gifting Spencer with a smile and rubbing his head. She wore a bomber jacket, white tank top, and skinny jeans. Her hair was no longer in the bun. It brushed the tops of her shoulders. Reed opened the door for her, and she stepped out in the hall. Not once did Tegan look in his direction as they rode the elevator down to the garage. She sucked her teeth at one point, rummaged around in her bag, and looked at her nails, but not one glance in his direction. Spencer sat on the floor between the two of them with not a care in the world. For some men, the behavior would have made them angry, but it amused him. He knew she was angry, but he knew the kind of element that lurked in the shadows waiting to prey on someone at this hour. There was no way he'd leave her to fend for herself, especially when he wasn't sure if she knew self-defense or even had a weapon. Which reminded him he needed to get her a gun. Tomorrow he'd find out if she knew how to shoot. Tonight he'd let her stew. She'd be angry but safe. At his position within the family, he could have a car and a driver, but he preferred to drive himself. He loved He loved classic cars, especially the black 1967 Ford Mustang GT Eleanor. It had fully restored a number of years ago, only Eleanor was more of a gunmetal gray. Plus, charcoal gray. Plus, Spencer liked to stretch out in the back seat. Without asking, Tegan turned on the radio a mile away from the penthouse. He wondered what type of music she'd settled on. She turned the knob, going from one satellite radio station to the next. When she finally settled on something, he was pleasantly surprised to hear Al Green's voice pour from the speakers. It was kind of surprising since the sexy song he sang was about him being tired of being alone. Tegan must have had the same thought he'd had about the song because she quickly turned to another station. Reed smirked. She didn't fare any better with the next song, and in defeat, jabbed the off button. After a few minutes passed, he glanced over at her. It was clear she was fighting hard to resist fatigue. She sagged against the seat, eyelids heavy, occasionally drifting shut when she'd briefly lose the battle, wobbling on her neck. Her head would droop forward, lolling to the side before the internal struggle forced her eyes back open. For a second, she'd sit more erect, eyes wide open, glued to the windshield. Seconds later, the drowsy symptoms would take hold once more. You're tired. Go to sleep. He maneuvered his car onto I-49 5 East, 495 East, without looking in her direction this time. In his periphery, she sat up sharply and glared at him, wanting and needing to say something smart about him ordering her around, argued that his observation was wrong. He waited, expected an argument. Instead, she lay her head against the headrest without saying anything and shut her eyes. 20 minutes later, he pulled up to the antiquated. Sometimes you see a word and you see the root word, so you're going to say it like that, and then you know that but the word itself is said just a little bit different. Brick front, semi-detached, two-bedroom house he knew she shared with her sick mother. When he cut the engine, he had half expected her to wake up. Still, she slept. The temptation to carry her inside so he could see her bedroom was short-lived. We're here. He nudged her when he spoke. Groggily, Tegan blinked her eyes and sat up. She looked toward the house, unsure it was her home. A small yawn escaped, and she covered her mouth. When it seemed her mind had woken enough to confirm she was at the right location, she gathered her purse and got out of the car. Right before she closed the door, she mumbled, "Thank you." She hurried up the few steps to her front door without a backward glance. He waited there until she was inside before he pulled away from the curb wearing an amused expression. So, Tegan did have manners. Dropping Tegan off in Queens had made his drive to Staten Island much longer, but he didn't care. All he kept thinking about was wiping that angry look from her face as he made her come over and over again until she begged him to stop. He knew he needed to put her out of his mind. The fucking woman had him thinking like a horny teenager. I got a whole peanut gallery of horny teenagers. He turned on the radio for the rest of the ride. Despite the hour, Reed knew Christy would be up waiting up for a report. Slowly, he cruised through the quiet, upscale neighborhood of, is it Todd Hill? I have no idea. He pulled up to the wrought iron gate and announced himself at the call box. After gaining entrance, he drove through the gate. A few lights were on in the lower level of the stately mansion. When Reed stepped out of the car, Spencer poked his head out and attempted to leave the car. Sorry, boy. He cupped Spencer's head in his hands and lovingly massaged the dog's face. Unfortunately, you got to stay here. No dogs allowed, remember? Spencer whined and pushed his wet nose into Reed's chest. I know. I'll try not to leave you out here too long. Once Spencer sprawled himself over the back seat, Reed rolled down the windows halfway and closed the door. Entering through the side door that led into the kitchen, he found Christy Moran seated on a bar stool at the breakfast bar reading the paper. The pale, bald, older man didn't look up from reading. Reed sat down next to him, Reed sat down next to him, used to the behavior. Christy addressed you when he was good and ready and not a second before. A noise came from the pantry, and then out stepped Christy's only son and Reed's best friend, Flynn. Unlike his father, Flynn had a head of thick, wavy blonde hair. He was equally as tall and well-built as Reed, but his face was clean-shaven. Hey, Flynn greeted Reed before dumping the items he'd pilfered from the pantry onto the countertop. Christy thumbed to the next page of his newspaper, continuing to ignore the two of them. I was making omelets. You want one? Flynn asked while turning on the knob of the gas burner and flipping open a carton of eggs. Sure. Reed and Flynn were halfway through eating their omelets and debating the Yankees' latest game when Christy folded the newspaper. They broke off their conversation, knowing this was the indicator that he was ready to talk business. Reed put his fork down and wiped his mouth with a napkin. Eddie made it through. Christy nodded. The other thing was also dealt with. They were paid off. Silence ensued. Before any more business could be discussed, Christy's baby brother, Quigley, walked in. A number of years ago, when Reed and Flynn were still kids, Quigley had done a bid upstate. Everyone knew it should have been Christy, but the loyal bastard had taken the fall for his brother so he could continue to run the family. Physically, Christy looked like a portly choir boy next to his kid brother. The man was the epitome of the stereotype of what someone assumed an Irish gangster looked like. Deep set blue eyes set over a hawk like nose on his craggy, weathered face. His hair was cut into a severe buzz cut. Even though Quigley had been released a few years ago, he still sported the prison physique, thanks to his tightly regimented exercise routine he still maintained. The wife beater he sported showed off the intricate tattoos on his back, chest, neck, and arms. His presence was enough intimidation for most people, but Quigley also had the demeanor of an attack dog. Since he was a kid, Reed had known that Quigley didn't like him. When he returned to the family after his stint, his dislike for Reed had only grown when he had seen how high Reed had climbed within the family. Upon entering the room, Quigley set his steely gaze on Reed. "What's with the fancy clothes?" There was no love lost between either of them because Reed's deep-seated hatred for the man went back further than either Christy or Flynn knew. Before things could heat up between the two of them, Christy intervened. "Leave him be. Have some breakfast. We were just discussing business." He patted the bar stool on the other side of him. "Flynn, make an omelet for your uncle." Grudgingly, Quigley listened to his brother and took a seat. Once he did, they were able to resume their talk. Midway through the conversation, thoughts of Tegan pushed their way into Reed's mind. A woman had never disrupted his thoughts, least of all during a business conversation. It had to be because he hadn't slept with her yet. One good fuck and he could get her out of his system. Maybe he needed to spend a bit more time at the penthouse to make that happen. Saw that icy demeanor of hers. Hell, he didn't mind her anger. In bed, he'd love to have her all wild and angry, nails scratching up his back. "You still with us?" Christy pulled him back into the conversation. Reed would definitely have to make sure he was at the penthouse tomorrow night. Over lunch, Tegan went through the stack of bills. Oh, chapter 3, Tegan. Over lunch, Tegan went through the stack of bills, trying to decide which ones deserved priority. She made decent money working for the Morans, but the massive amount of debt her father left them in when he died, and the astronomical health care fees that kept incurring to deal with her mother's cancer was crippling. "Mortgage payments or hospital bill," she mumbled to herself before cramming a piece of toast into her mouth. An envelope beneath the latest bill gave her pause. The toast seemed extremely dry this time around when she swallowed. Tegan was thankful her mother was upstairs with the nurse, so she wouldn't see the expression on her face and ask questions. All she could do was hold the envelope in her hands and stare at it. NYU Grossman School of Medicine. It felt like a lifetime ago that she'd been a student, on her way to becoming a doctor, and not someone illegally playing doctor. She stuffed an open letter into her purse without looking at it and continued to go through the bills. Now that she worked the night shifts, she felt like a vampire. She'd come home in the early morning and sleep until mid-afternoon. Wake up and cook bacon, eggs, and toast for herself, and then head to the penthouse. Rinse and repeat. Her life had become very monotonous. Tegan sighed. Looking at her watch, she knew she'd better finish up so she could leave soon. Before she left, she headed upstairs to say goodbye to her mother. "Hi, Tegan." Rosie, the nurse that came by twice a week, greeted her with a smile. "Hey, Rosie." Tegan turned her attention to her mother. The cancer had not only ravaged her body, but her once vibrant spirit. Her mother was a shell of her former self, but both physically and often mentally. The chemo and radiation treatments claimed her magnificent afro earlier in the process. Her mother's now bald head was covered by a headscarf. Hi, Mama. Tegan leaned over the bed and kissed the top of her mother's head. I love you. She whispered the words low so only her mother would hear them. Her mother squeezed her hand and gave her a wan smile. After she left the house, the 15-minute walk to the subway gave her time to clear her head. The ride on the F train was brief and crowded. She stuck her headphones in her ear and allowed herself to be swept up in the crowd of the other commuters making the transfer to the E train. While she waited on the platform, she found herself thinking of Reed. Of all the damn people who could invade her thoughts right now, why did it have to be him? There was no need for her to answer that. She knew why. Even though the man was a thug and embodied everything she hated, ruthless, bloodthirsty, and merciless, she still found him sexy as sin. It disgusted Tegan that she was physically attracted to him. After another transfer, she took her seat on the A train, her angry thoughts now a snarled mass in her head. A man waved his hand in front of her face to get her attention. Was he a tourist? She pulled an earbud out of her ear and gave him a questioning look. The middle-aged dad with the fanny pack grinned at her. Why the frown? A pretty girl like you should be smiling. What the fuck? Did this guy really just tell her she should smile? Tegan kept the angry scowl plastered on her face. This man had invaded her solitude with some nonsense. When she stuffed the earbud back in her ear without giving the man a response, she blamed it all on Reed. If she hadn't been irritated with herself over thinking about him, then she would have been wearing a neutral expression and wouldn't have been bothered by this asshat who thought she owed him a smile. The rest of the ride, she stared the man dead in his face, mean mugging him the whole time until he got up and moved. Fucking Reed Beckett. From the subway in Manhattan, it was about a 15-minute walk. When she reached the building, she stood on the corner looking up at the beautiful modern high rise. To any other person on the street, the building represented money, power, a better life. The only thing she saw when she looked up at it was her personal prison. Christy Moran had been her savior when she came to him 6 months ago, hoping to get the low-life bookie off their backs. Tegan had been able to barter her medical knowledge and skills in exchange for a job and him dealing with the bookies. Now he was her warden. Would he ever consider her debt paid, or was she doomed to be tied to them for the rest of her life? By the time she stormed into the penthouse, her mood had soured even more. Thankfully, no one got in her way. The rest of the night went by in a blur. Throughout her shift, she checked on the goon from last night, stitched up a superficial knife wound and some other minor injuries. Overall, it was pretty mellow night. It was a pretty mellow night. When her shift ended, she exited through the false wall after punching in her code. Walking down the hall toward the kitchen, she expected to find the house empty, but instead she found Reed sitting at the kitchen counter reading. Maybe he hadn't become aware of her and she could just step back into the hallway. Quietly, she tiptoed backward, trying not to make a sound. Have you read this book before? He gave the paperback in his hand a brief shake. It's really good. Tegan stopped moving and huffed. Damn. Reed looked up from his book. While he stuffed the bookmark into the battered copy of whatever he was reading, his gaze roamed over her body before their eyes met. Folding her arms across her chest, she glared at him. I didn't know Neanderthals could read. Cute. You think by calling me a knuckle dragger, you'll piss me off? I passed puberty years ago, princess. Won't work. He smirked. Inwardly, she seethed. She knew he wanted her to take the bait over him calling her princess. If she did, he'd win. Why did she let him get her riled up and playing these childish games? Whew. Sweet dreams. Have dreams of me, Thomas. Choosing to ignore him, she turned to walk away and go change her clothes, but his words stopped her. Let me know when you're ready to leave so I can drive you home. Smugness oozed from every syllable. Thankfully, her back was to him. There was no way she was getting in the car with him again. This wasn't going to become a habit. Reed could go play the white knight with some other woman because she didn't need to be rescued. Without a retort, she continued down the hallway. She was certain there was another way out of the pit house. Once she dressed and grabbed her bags, she crept down the hall to make sure Reed was still in the kitchen. Halfway there, she heard Bernard's voice along with his. Good. Retracing her steps back down the hall, Tegan tiptoed through the maid's quarters to the seldom used service elevator. She crept toward the elevator and pushed the button. Please work. Holding her breath and silently saying a small prayer, Tegan waited to see if it would work. When the tiny ding sounded at the arrival and the doors opened, she let out the breath she'd been holding and grinned. Stepping out into the alleyway, she felt victorious. She outsmarted Reed. Now she could have some peace. About a minute after leaving the alley, a weird sensation overcame her. With each step, it intensified. Carefully, she scanned her surroundings. There was no one else out on the street that she could see. She gripped her bags a little tighter, trying not to be spooked. But then she heard footsteps. Was Reed following her? Tegan dismissed the thought. If he came after her, he'd probably come in his car, if he came at all. Someone was following her. She didn't want to alert them that she was aware of their presence. Slowly and without calling attention to her movements, she pulled the baton from the hidden pocket she'd sewn into her bag. For a moment, she just held it in a death grip, praying she wouldn't have to use it. 30 seconds later, she knew she had no choice. The person was now walking at a quicker pace and gaining on her. Adrenaline was pumping in her veins. Turning down a side street, she hoped they'd keep walking straight, but no such luck. She was too far down the street when she realized it probably wasn't a good choice. Many of the lights weren't working, and the street mostly consisted of businesses that were closed. No one would hear her cries for help. Tegan took a deep breath. 1, 2, 3. She counted quietly under her breath, and then on 3, she spun around and swung the baton in a forceful downward motion so the expandable part of the baton deployed. Whoever the idiot was following her, he was about to get his head bashed in. Tegan's hope that the person would be scared off once she confronted them deflated when the guy ran toward her in an attack mode. She struck out with the baton, but he was able to dodge most of the impact. It barely caught him on the arm. The man, who wore jeans and a hoodie pulled over his baseball cap, lunged for her. Quick, clumsy backward steps kept her out of his reach. Swinging the baton again, she tried to hit him in the face. She leaned out of the way, narrowly missing the end of the baton once. He leaned out of the way, narrowly missing the end of the baton once again. This guy was fast. Her brain was trying to keep up with his movements, but also she was trying to think. If he just wanted to rob her, why not run up and steal her bag? He could have easily run off, and she probably wouldn't have been able to chase him down to get it back. When she swung again and smacked him in the thigh, she saw him wince in pain. He backed off for a second, but her victory was short-lived as her tired brain finally came to the conclusion that if he hadn't accosted her for money, he wanted something else. Her. Rage and fear filled her with that thought, and no longer was she making calculated moves. Now it was emotion that drove her. Her movements became wild. He sensed the shift and became bolder. It was like he grew 10 feet tall and more menacing. Could he smell her fear, taste her panic on the tip of his tongue like a newfound flavor to savor? Her next move was so forceful that it sent her spinning for a second, and that was when he was able to land a punch to her midsection. The breath was knocked out of her body so suddenly it made her head swim. Tegan tried to breathe. She gulped for air, trying to pull oxygen into her lungs. That's when he grabbed her. You bitch! Even as she tried to regain her breath, she attempted to swing the baton, but he had a hold on her of her now. Her bags fell off her shoulder in the ensuing struggle. The clatter and noise of the contents spilling out was not enough sound to alert anyone. She clawed at him, trying to make her nails rake her nails over his face or any bit of exposed skin. The moment she regained her breath and went to call for help, he clamped a hand over her mouth and wrestled her to the ground. God, she couldn't let him get her to the ground. Under his hand, her screams were muffled in her ears. Her limbs flailed as she struck out at him. Her assault seemed to have no effect. Quiet, bitch! He reared up and backhanded her hard across the face. Spots danced in front of her eyes. Tegan opened and closed her jaw, trying to make sure it still worked, and he had broken it. When she finally recovered from the stupor, the slap sent her into. He was between her legs. He was between her legs, trying to undo her belt. Seeing lights where I shouldn't be seeing lights. I was just wondering. No, 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 no. She punched and continued to lash out, not willing to concede. With one hand, he was trying to grab at her arms to stop her from beating him. The other hand wrapped around her throat and tried to choke him into submission. Tegan scratched at his hand, trying to free herself. If he was able to choke her out, she was done for. Her would-be rapist pressed himself further onto her body. She had to keep the panic at bay, or she was going to suffocate on it before he subdued her. Frantically, she tried to look around while she attempted to pull his fingers from around her throat. When she turned her head sideways, she caught the glint of the streetlight shining on something metal. Her vision blurred for a second as she fought for breath, fought to stay conscious. Blinking her eyes a few times, she focused on the object. It was the knife she kept in her bag. It had fallen out during the scuffle. The rapist bent over her body, attempting to kiss and lick her neck while he tried to strangle her. Her fingers scrambled across the concrete, stretching toward the knife. Just a little further. Her vision swam again, and her air supply continued to dwindle. Finally, her fingers grasped the knife handle, and with as much energy as she could muster, she drove the blade into his side. The moment it pierced his flesh, his hold on her went slack. Tegan gasped and spluttered for air, but she managed to drive the knife into him a few more times. After he was slumped across her body and ceased to breathe, she finally stopped. His blood was warm and sticky on her hand and arm that still held the knife. For a minute, Tegan just lay there staring up at the night sky. I'm alive. She took a few deep breaths, even though it burned. She had to get him off of her. Help! She wheezed out, not loud enough for anyone to hear. Help! Calling out again, she tried to force the words out louder, even though it hurt. Since the knife was still in her hand, Tegan smacked it against the ground, hoping someone would hear her. Finally, she gathered all of her strength once more and pushed out a raspy but loud shout for help. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Had someone heard or possibly seen? Were they coming to help? Suddenly, she heard footsteps. Part of her was fearful. What if the person wasn't there to help her? Guess what time it is? It's Nene-Na's night time. Alrighty. So the whole book, if you're going to go buy it on Amazon, is called Big City Heat, a high-rise romance anthology. And like I said, it has 12 authors. These are hot, sexy stories, y'all. And this particular one is called Make Me Beg, I believe, right? I'm not there right now. And it's by Moni Boyce. Yay! And it's only 99 cents. So, booyah. So, go get it. Yes. And I will read, if I can get there. This is an intro. It's a whole story. It's 9 chapters long, I believe. This won't let me just go through. Oh, yeah, Bill. Okay. This is the prequel to the Bound the Fixer trilogy. Stay tuned for the first book, Make Me Trust. See how Tegan fares as a member of the Moran family and a new wife, and find out whether Tegan and Reed start to fall in love. Whew, that said a lot and nothing at the same time. Oh my gosh. So you guys need to go read it, especially if you like mafia romance. Some good stuff here, right? I know, right? Equal Justice Initiative. So go buy it. I mean, 99 cents. That's easy donation. You guys can do this. Alrighty. So, okay, I'm going to bed. You guys have a wonderful weekend. Tomorrow is Naked Friday, so be naked at some point in time and just enjoy it. It's fun to be naked. Ask Kanina. She can tell you all about how much fun certain people have in her household when they're naked. All by themselves. Alrighty, everybody. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. 6 feet apart. Mask. All that good stuff. Alrighty. We'll talk at you later. Have a good one. I love you guys. Happy reading. That didn't go where it was supposed to. There we go.